the only brick house on the corner. If you drove into Willowbrook Estates at sunrise, you'd think you'd found the safest, quietest pocket of America. The lawns were clipped within an inch of perfection. The mailboxes matched. Even the golden retrievers seemed coordinated, walking politely beside their owners like they understood property values were at stake. At the very end of the cul-de-sac stood my house, the only brick one. Everyone else had beige siding with white trim. Mine was red brick with black shutters and a wraparound porch I rebuilt myself the year I moved in. It sat on the largest lot in the subdivision, just under an acre, sloping down toward a narrow creek that cut through the back edge of the property like a silver ribbon. I bought it 11 years ago, right after the developer's clubhouse plans fell through. The land had been marked future community recreation space, but when funding dried up, it was reparceled and listed quietly. I made an offer before anyone else realized what it was worth. Back then, a few neighbors introduced themselves with polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Are you renting?" one woman had asked. "No," I'd replied. "I'm the owner." There had been a pause, just long enough to say something without saying it. "My name is Marcus Hill. I'm 45, own a mid-sized contracting company downtown, and I like quiet mornings more than I like people. Most days start the same way. 5:30 a.m. black coffee back porch chair, watching the mist rise off the creek while the rest of Willowbrook sleeps. It's peaceful in a way that feels earned. The deck overlooks a wide open lawn framed by 2 old oak trees. I built the stone fire pit myself. Installed the soft lighting along the fence line. Every board, every nail chosen intentionally. It wasn't just landscaping. It was proof. Proof that I belonged there. Willowbrook's HOA was known for being active. That was the polite word. The president, Denise Halvorsen, had held the position for nearly 8 years. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, sharper tone. She treated the neighborhood like a portfolio investment. Property values first. People second. In the beginning, I received more reminder letters than anyone else on the block. My trash bin left out 20 minutes too long. My grass allegedly 1/4 inch above regulation height. My truck, a clean, polished black F-250, described once as commercial in appearance. Meanwhile, 2 houses down, an aging camper sat in a driveway for months without a single notice. I learned quickly that compliance wasn't the real issue. Visibility was. Still, I followed every rule. Not because I feared fines, but because I refused to give anyone an excuse. That's why the wooden stakes caught my attention immediately. It was a Tuesday morning. Cool air, light fog over the creek. I walked down the slope with my coffee and noticed 3 thin wooden markers pushed into the soil near the waterline. They weren't there the night before. No city paint. No survey tape. No identification. Just plain stakes. I pulled one out easily. It left a narrow hole in the earth. I scanned the tree line, half expecting to see a surveyor packing up equipment. Nothing. I told myself it was probably kids from the neighboring development cutting through the creek path. Annoying but harmless. I tossed the stakes into my garage and left for work. That afternoon, an email from the HOA landed in my inbox. Subject: Community Enhancement Event. Normally I skimmed and deleted. This one I opened. Willowbrook Estates is proud to support a private celebration utilizing one of our most scenic natural features. It read. Further logistical details will follow. Scenic natural features. There was only one scenic feature in Willowbrook. The creek. My creek. I reread the message twice. No specific address listed. No map attached. Just vague language about unity and shared spaces. Shared. That word lingered. When I got home, Denise was standing near the edge of my property line. She wasn't on my lawn, just close enough to study it without technically trespassing. Beside her stood a young couple I didn't recognize. The woman held what looked like a wedding planner binder. The man wore loafers too clean for yard work. They were pointing toward the oak trees, toward my deck. I stepped onto the porch. "Evening," I called. Denise smiled quickly, as if she'd rehearsed it. "Marcus, we were just admiring the creek. It's such a beautiful community asset." Community asset. I walked closer but stayed on my side of the invisible line. "It's a drainage easement," I said evenly. "On private property." The young woman spoke up, her voice light. We're planning a small ceremony in June. Intimate. Just family. That's nice, I replied. Denise nodded. We're finalizing placement options. The board feels it would be wonderful to showcase the natural backdrop. The board? I asked. Another pause. It was subtle. The kind of silence you only notice when you've lived inside them your whole life. Well, Denise corrected smoothly, nothing is official yet. The couple smiled politely, but there was something else there, expectation. As if the decision had already been made somewhere I hadn't been invited. They eventually walked away, continuing their quiet discussion halfway down the street. I stood in the yard long after they disappeared. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. My grass. The deck lights flickered on automatically, warm against the brick exterior. From across the cul-de-sac, I caught a glimpse of two neighbors watching from a window. Curious. Observing. The next morning, a white pickup truck rolled slowly down the street. On the back were stacked white folding chairs, the kind used for outdoor weddings. It didn't stop completely, just slowed, right in front of my house, then continued on. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. I've spent my career around construction sites, around permits, zoning maps, right-of-way regulations. I know the look of pre-planning when I see it. And this felt like pre-planning. The stakes in my yard hadn't been random. They'd been measuring, testing, assuming. And assumptions, I've learned, grow fastest in places where people think they already understand who you are. I took out my phone and snapped photos of the property line, the slope, the oak trees. Documentation. Because something told me this wasn't about a small ceremony anymore. It was about boundaries. And in Willowbrook Estates, boundaries had a way of becoming negotiable, depending on who owned them. The meeting minutes. By Thursday morning, Willowbrook looked exactly the way it always did. Sprinklers ticking in perfect rhythm. Delivery vans gliding through like they had permission from God himself. Retirees power walking in coordinated athleisure sets. And me on my porch, same black coffee. Same quiet routine. If anyone driving by had looked at my house, they would have seen calm, order, control. What they wouldn't have seen was the printed copy of the HOA bylaws sitting on the table beside me, highlighted in 3 different colors. I hadn't lost sleep over the creek conversation. Not yet. But I don't believe in coincidences. Especially not when rental trucks start slowing down near my mailbox. At 9:12 a.m. my phone buzzed. HOA board meeting minutes, special session. Special session? I opened the PDF. Item 3. Approval of temporary use of natural creekside greenbelt for private matrimonial event. Sponsored by residents of 18, Willowbrook Court. Greenbelt. I read that word 3 times. There was no greenbelt in Willowbrook Estates. No designated parkland. The only stretch of open, creek-adjacent lawn was mine. They had renamed my backyard. Just like that. The document went on to describe temporary seating arrangements and minimal-impact decorative installations. It even mentioned a wooden arch placement near waterline. Near the waterline. That was exactly where the wooden stakes had been. I leaned back slowly in my chair. This wasn't casual. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was paperwork. And paperwork meant someone believed this would hold up if challenged. Across the street, Dave was washing his SUV. He gave me a small nod. The kind that says, I know something but I'm not getting involved. 2 houses down, Mrs. Kessler stood at her window longer than necessary, pretending to water a single hanging plant. In neighborhoods like this, information spreads quietly, selectively. You don't always hear the conversation, but you feel the shift. At noon, Denise herself walked up my driveway. She didn't text first, didn't call, just appeared. She wore linen slacks and carried a leather folder tucked under her arm like she was arriving at a closing. Marcus, she said brightly, as if we were old friends. Do you have a moment? I'm on my porch, I replied. Seems like I do. She gave a small laugh and stepped onto the first stair. Not fully committing to the porch, but close enough to imply authority. I wanted to clarify the minutes you likely received this morning. I did. Wonderful. We're very excited about this event. It's such a lovely opportunity for the community. The community, I repeated. She smiled patiently. The Johnsons are new homeowners. We want them to feel welcomed. I studied her face carefully. And welcoming them requires my property? Her expression shifted just slightly. The creek easement technically provides shared visual access. It's been interpreted in prior developments as a flexible use area. Visual access, I said slowly, is not physical access. She exhaled softly like I was being difficult. No one is trying to take anything from you, Marcus. It's one afternoon. A few chairs. A simple arch. And 100 guests? 45, she corrected quickly. So she'd counted. She adjusted the folder under her arm. The board voted unanimously. How many board members have yards backing to the creek? She didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. I hope we can handle this neighborly. There it was. Not a threat. Not outright. But the implication hung in the air like humidity before a storm. I kept my tone calm. Neighborly would have been asking first. She hesitated for half a second, long enough to confirm what I already suspected. They hadn't planned to ask. They'd planned to inform. And maybe in some quiet calculation they'd assumed I wouldn't push back. Because I kept my lawn perfect. Because I didn't attend wine nights. Because I didn't cause scenes. Denise's voice softened, almost sympathetic. Sometimes integration into a community requires flexibility. Integration. I felt the word settle heavy in my chest. I'd lived here 11 years. Paid every HOA due on time. Sponsored the holiday lights twice when funding fell short. Plowed snow from 3 neighbors' driveways during the big winter storm. Integration. I stood up slowly from my chair. My property lines are clearly defined in the county registry. You're welcome to review them. She straightened, the pleasant mask thinning. We're simply trying to avoid unnecessary tension. No, I said evenly. You're trying to avoid paperwork. For a brief moment, something flashed in her eyes. Annoyance. Calculation. Then the smile returned. Well, we'll continue preparations. If you have formal objections, you're free to submit them in writing. Formal objections. As if I were petitioning to keep my own yard. She walked down the driveway without another word. Within the hour, I noticed something new. 2 teenagers placing small chalk marks along the curb near my house. Color-coded. Numbered. I stepped outside again. They froze. Who asked you to do that? I asked calmly. One of them shrugged. Event planner set to mark delivery zones. Event planner. Delivery zones. On a residential street. I looked up and down Willowbrook. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open slightly. Watching. Always watching. The problem with places that pride themselves on order is that they assume control belongs to them by default. And when someone doesn't fit their original blueprint, even years later, they treat boundaries like suggestions. I walked back inside and pulled up the county property database. Then zoning ordinances. Then easement regulations. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I recognized escalation when I saw it. This wasn't about a wedding. It was about assumption. And assumptions, when left unchecked, turn into entitlement. As evening settled over Willowbrook, the creek behind my house glowed gold under the setting sun. Peaceful. Undisturbed. But near the waterline, I noticed fresh footprints in the soil. Someone had come back. Measuring again. I took more photos. Documented timestamps. Because if they wanted to play this through paperwork, they'd chosen the wrong backyard. And they had no idea what kind of contracts I specialized in enforcing. Polite smiles and paper trails. Saturday mornings in Willowbrook Estates were predictable. At exactly 8 a.m., the hum of lawnmowers would roll across the cul-de-sac like a coordinated orchestra. By 9 o'clock, the smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with expensive charcoal as someone inevitably decided it was a good day to test their grill. I kept my routine unchanged. Coffee. Porch. Creek. Control what you can control. The backyard looked exactly as it should. Wide green lawn sloping gently toward the water. Oak branches stretching overhead like quiet guardians. If you ignored the faint indentations near the waterline, you'd never know strangers had been measuring it like a venue. From my porch chair, I could see straight across to the Kessler's kitchen window. Mrs. Kessler was pretending not to look at me again. Every time our eyes almost met, she adjusted something unnecessary. Blinds, flowers, her glasses. Information traveled in this neighborhood through glances. And today the glances lingered. At 8:17 a.m., a white SUV rolled slowly past my house. Magnetic signage on the side. Elegant Moments event planning. It didn't stop. Didn't need to. The driver slowed long enough to scan my yard, then continued toward Denise's house at the center of the circle. So it was official now. I stood, walked down the steps, and paced the edge of my lawn. Calmly. Deliberately. Anyone watching would see nothing but a homeowner inspecting his property, which is exactly what I was doing. Near the creek bank I noticed something new: small flags. Thin white ones pressed low into the soil, nearly invisible unless you were looking for them. They'd come back after I removed the wooden stakes. Quieter this time. Subtler. Testing boundaries again. I pulled them out one by one and placed them in a neat stack. Across the street, Dave suddenly found great interest in the inside of his garage. By 10 a.m., Denise had sent another email. Subject: Final layout confirmation. I opened it without emotion. Attached was a diagram. My yard, rendered in a simplified digital sketch. Labeled as Creekside Greenbelt. Rows of chairs arranged in semicircles. A wooden arch marked precisely where my fire pit sat. A catering station positioned near my deck steps. My deck steps. They hadn't just claimed the grass. They'd planned to use my porch access. I zoomed in on the fine print at the bottom. HOA authorized use under Community Enhancement Clause 14B. Clause 14B covered seasonal decorations in shared entryways. Shared entryways. Not private land. I exhaled slowly. Across the cul-de-sac, two women stood chatting beside a mailbox. Their conversation stopped the second I looked up. One of them offered a tight smile. The kind reserved for someone you're tolerating, not respecting. Willowbrook had always been friendly, just not warm. There's a difference. When I first moved in, invitations to neighborhood gatherings had been selective. I'd learned about events after they happened. Seen photos posted in the community group. Smiling faces beneath string lights that had apparently been visible from my backyard. No one ever said I wasn't included. They just never included me. And now, somehow, my property was communal. At noon, I drove to the local hardware store for mulch. Normal errand. Normal life. 2 aisles over, I overheard a familiar voice. Denise. Yes, it's perfect. She was saying softly into her phone. It will look beautiful against the brick backdrop. The brick backdrop. My house. She noticed me at the end of the aisle and paused mid-sentence. Her smile appeared instantly. Marcus, she said sweetly, lowering the phone. Getting ready for summer? Something like that. She tilted her head. You know, this event will really showcase how inclusive Willowbrook is. Inclusive. There was that word again. I set the mulch bag into my cart slowly. Inclusive would have been asking. She sighed lightly, like she was tired of repeating herself. We're trying to build harmony. On my land. Her expression hardened just a fraction. You're part of this community. I am, I agreed. Which is why I pay for my own yard. The silence between us stretched thin. A man at the end of the aisle pretended to compare fertilizer bags while clearly listening. Denise recovered first. It's just one afternoon. I nodded. That's what small things always are at first. Her eyes flickered. There it was, the smallest crack in confidence. Because she knew. This wasn't small anymore. When I returned home, another vehicle was parked along the curb. This time a catering van idling briefly before moving on. The chalk marks were brighter now. More deliberate. I walked inside, placed the mulch by the garage and went straight to my office. Blueprint tubes lined one wall. Permit folders stacked neatly in filing cabinets. Contracts, zoning maps, legal documents, the language I spoke fluently. If Willowbrook wanted to redefine private property through creative wording, they'd underestimated the wrong homeowner. I opened my laptop and began drafting a formal notice. Not emotional. Not aggressive. Precise. Citing county code. Easement limitations. Liability exposure. Unauthorized event hosting statutes. By 4 p.m., I'd sent it certified to the HOA board and copied the event planning company directly. Subject: Formal objection and cease notice. Unauthorized use of private property. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. For a brief moment, everything looked peaceful again. Children rode bikes at the end of the street. Someone laughed over a backyard fence. Wind rustled through the oak leaves. Normal. But peace built on assumption is fragile. At 6:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a neighborhood group notification. Denise had posted, "Let's all come together to support love and unity in Willowbrook. Some members may need gentle encouragement to embrace community spirit." Gentle encouragement. The comments began stacking up. Absolutely. Can't wait. It's about time we use that space properly. That space. I closed the app. From my porch, I watched as porch lights flickered on one by one around the cul-de-sac. Warm glows in tidy homes. And at the end of the circle, the only brick house stood quiet, solid, and fully owned. They saw a backdrop. A scenic feature. A flexible use space. What they didn't see was a line. And lines once crossed, don't quietly uncross themselves. The sound of engines. The Monday before the wedding was unnaturally quiet. No lawnmowers. No delivery vans. No casual walkers looping the cul-de-sac. It felt like Willowbrook Estates was holding its breath. I kept my routine the same. 5:30 a.m. coffee. Porch. Creek. The sky was pale blue, barely awake. A thin layer of mist hovered over the water, blurring the line between land and reflection. For a few peaceful minutes it almost felt like nothing had changed. The oak trees stood tall and steady. The deck lights clicked off automatically as daylight took over. The grass was cut perfectly, precise lines running diagonally across the yard. Control what you can control. But even in that stillness, something felt different. Across the street, the Kessler's blinds were already open. Not casually open, fully drawn back. Watching. At 7:12 a.m., a dark sedan pulled slowly into the cul-de-sac and parked along the curb near my mailbox. The engine idled. The driver didn't get out. 5 minutes later it left. Scouting. By 9 a.m. the neighborhood Facebook group was alive. Rehearsal walkthrough today. Can't wait to see the creek setup. So proud of our HOA for organizing this. Organizing. Not asking. Organizing. At 10:30 Denise sent one final email. Subject. Final preparations. Cooperation appreciated. It was brief. Friendly reminder that vendor access will occur Friday afternoon for Saturday's event. We trust all residents will extend courtesy. Courtesy. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my office. Permit binders. County codes. Copies of the certified notice I'd already sent. They hadn't responded to it. Not formally. Which meant they were pretending it didn't matter. Outside, a white pickup with a trailer crawled down the street. Wooden arch strapped flat against the bed. White fabric bundled in plastic. It stopped directly in front of my driveway. The driver checked his phone, then looked at my yard. I walked outside before he could knock. "Can I help you?" I asked calmly. He glanced at his clipboard. "Creekside Wedding Install? Wrong address." He hesitated. "I've got Willowbrook Greenbelt." "There is no Greenbelt." He looked uncertain. "HOA sent this layout." "I sent them something too," I replied. "It was called a cease notice." He blinked, clearly not paid enough for this. From 3 houses down, Denise emerged from her front door, walking briskly in heels that clicked against the pavement like punctuation. She smiled bright and practiced. "Oh, Marcus. Our vendors are just staging." "On whose authority?" I asked. "The board's." I held her gaze. "The board doesn't own this land." Several neighbors had stepped outside now. Casual. Curious. Arms crossed. Phones in hand. A small audience. Denise's tone shifted slightly. Still pleasant but thinner. "You're creating unnecessary tension." "No," I said evenly. "I'm enforcing a boundary." There it was again, that subtle flicker in her expression. The moment she realized the script wasn't going her way. Behind her, the young bride-to-be stood near the sidewalk, binder clutched to her chest. Her fiancé whispered something in her ear. She looked toward my deck, then at Denise, confusion starting to replace certainty. The driver cleared his throat. "So where do you want the arch?" Denise didn't answer him immediately, because at that exact moment, a new sound entered the cul-de-sac. Low, heavy, mechanical. Not a sedan, not a pickup. An engine with weight behind it. Every head turned toward the entrance of Willowbrook Estates. The first truck rolled in slowly, white, industrial, unmistakable. Company logo clean and official on the side. Behind it, another. And another. Flatbeds. Equipment trailers. Orange safety cones stacked high. My trucks. The lead driver parked directly in front of my house. Engine idling steadily. Calmly. Silently dominant. Denise's heels stopped clicking. "What is this?" she asked, voice tight. I checked my watch. Scheduled site work. Her eyes widened. Site work. I nodded toward the far edge of my yard, the section closest to the creek. Drainage reinforcement. Soil stabilization. Perfectly permitted. Which it was. Filed Friday afternoon. Approved first thing Monday. When you know zoning officers personally, paperwork moves efficiently. The foreman stepped out of the truck and approached me. Hard hat tucked under his arm. "Morning, Mr. Hill. We ready to secure the perimeter?" "We are." He turned and signaled to the crew. Orange cones began lining the entire boundary of my property. Bright. Impossible to ignore. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Denise stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're doing this deliberately." "Yes." Her jaw tightened. "The wedding is Saturday. And construction is Monday through Friday," I replied calmly. "As allowed by county ordinance." The bride looked near tears now. "Denise, what's happening?" Denise didn't answer her. Because she was finally understanding something she hadn't calculated. You can pressure a person. You can isolate a person. You can even attempt to redefine their boundaries. But you cannot override permits. The second truck began unloading temporary fencing panels. Not permanent. Just enough to legally secure an active worksite, which, by law, would make the area inaccessible to non-crew members for safety reasons. Dave across the street muttered something under his breath. The Kesslers retreated inside. Phones lowered. Denise's polished composure cracked at the edges. "This is retaliation," she said. "No," I corrected gently. "This is ownership." The engines hummed steadily behind me as the crew worked with efficient precision. Not aggressive. Not chaotic. Professional. My backyard, the so-called greenbelt, was now an active permitted construction zone. Legally untouchable. The oak trees still swayed gently above it all. The creek still moved quietly along its path. Peaceful. Unbothered. But this time the peace wasn't fragile. It was protected. Denise stood there a moment longer, calculating, recalibrating. Because for the first time since this began, the assumptions had shifted. And in Willowbrook Estates, where everything looked controlled and curated, the most disruptive thing wasn't noise. It was a boundary enforced without apology.